Senator Ayres, it really strikes me listening to Dr. Hilton talking about the changes he's having to make and the cuts, that at the same time that we're talking about a future made in Australia, the value of research, you clearly share my love and respect of the CSIRO. We're giving them less money. I'm just interested, what's the government's thinking there, making the CSIRO at this point in time, given the huge challenges we face, make cuts to their research?
Well, as Mr. Hilton's set out,
he's only doing that because he's got a $100 million hole in his budget. I'm sure there's plenty of areas where scientists would love to do more research.
Yes,
so
and
I think
you've got a minister who supports science and public science and research and development, but a government that is absolutely behind the CSIRO and our other research institutions more broadly. There has to be budget allocation, as Mr. Hilton set out for you and for Senator Hodgins-May. There was a terminating measure which was to provide additional funding, which I think everybody in the Parliament would have supported, additional funds during that period. That has come to an end, so that is the first set of issues. As I understand it, I've listened carefully to the evidence. The second set of issues, of course, is that the CSIRO's research priorities will shift over time. Right? And my expectation, the government's expectation, is that the CSIRO, that Mr. Hilton and his team will work with the staff and the trade unions that represent them at the CSIRO in an open and careful way. It's gone. I've been watching from a distance. It's gone over the course of several estimates, so that is quite some months as the CSIRO works through those issues. That's our expectation, that the CSIRO manages that process well.
Sure. I'm sure Dr. Hilton would be like to spend his time on doing other things than having to restructure and cut jobs. And I guess my question to the government is, why, when we have in our history a record low research and development spend, when you have scientists and researchers doing more with less, are we happy for the CSIRO to have to cut $100 million? And why are we at a record low in R&D, and the only thing we've seen from the government is a review to potentially look at increasing it?
Well, the CSIRO is part of the public effort in R&D for the country,
and their budget's being cut.
It is part of it. It is, of course, not the only part of the public effort. So that is the states and territories, the Commonwealth, the university sector, the CRCs, all of the architecture that sits there to support publicly funded research. Some of that is more commercially focused, some of it's deep public research. Then, of course, there is the private sector.
But none of them are getting extra money from the government.
Well, I think...
So you're saying they're part of it, but it's not like you're allocating millions of dollars to other research areas. Like we're at rock bottom, 0.5% of GDP.
I think what you'll find is that this government is, in terms of all of those, in terms of the publicly funded component, providing a lot of support, not in the order of millions of dollars, but billions of dollars across the system for the publicly funded component of that research. I want to see, and I think the Minister wants to see, the private sector lift its contribution on those questions as well. The big, I have to say.
Your last question, Senator Pocock.
Yeah. So that's so. Of course, that is. You've heard the Minister out there on these questions in terms of the R&D review. There's a high level of interest in how we focus and amplify public research in the public interest.
I mean, I don't remember a science minister who cares more about science, to be honest. Clearly, Minister Husick cares. You care. This is a question for your government and priorities when it comes to Treasury and the budget. There's a CSIRO report quantifying Australia's return to innovation. It highlights that for every dollar invested in research, Australia receives an estimated return of $3.50, with a 10% average annual return. Seems like a damn good investment.
Yes, and that's...
So when are we going to see Treasury and the government back up Minister Cusack and yourself and the CSIRO?
Well, the government believes, all of us, that we have to maximise the impact of our research and development capability, including the CSIRO. That's why the strategic review of R&D has been undertaken. The truth is that the last time, we are languishing on the proportion of GDP that's contributed.
And that hasn't gone up under your government.
It is. The last time that investment peaked was 2.25% of GDP was when Labor was in government. The truth is, what is required in order to lift GDP is long-term Labor governments that invest in science and research and encourage the private sector to invest. That is the truth. It's not something that's achieved in 5 minutes or 2 years. It's achieved in a sustained way with a government, with prime ministers and ministers who support public research and don't denigrate it like Senator Roberts just did, or the Leader of the Opposition spends his time clowning around, pouring scorn on public science institutions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Dr Hilton. Thank you to the representatives from CSIRO.